There's a line in a 16th century poem by John Dowland that asks this question: must I praise the leaves where no fruit I find? Like a lot of English poetry of the period, it seems on the surface to be talking about unrequited love. Why waste my time on a maiden who doesn't return my affection? But the subtle religious references in the poem tend to make me think that the poet is actually asking a much more controversial question. Why stick with the Christian religion when it doesn't seem to hold up to its claims? Lots of leaves, not much fruit. A letter from one of our YouTube viewers this week was asking me this question in another way. The writer, who identifies himself as Warren, said that he is a Mormon who has a son that recently told him that he's gay. Warren found himself, in his words, stepping back from a church that consigns my son to hell. Warren said that he had been watching a lot of Bishop Spong's videos online, which led him to mine, and after taking in some progressive sermons for several months, something that was so very different from his lifetime experience in the Mormon church, he asked me, why are you a Christian? What does it matter? Why should a person involve themselves in the quest for an unknowable God? I'm left thinking that there is no God, that Jesus was just a dude who went about feeding hungry people, but died and ought to be forgotten because he is dead. I decided to answer Warren publicly because some version of this dilemma is probably familiar to everyone here and nearly everyone who listens into our service on iTunes or YouTube. Why do we still gather to praise the leaves when the fruit we were originally promised is nowhere to be found and probably doesn't exist? It never did. Apparently, we were lied to. In almost every case, we experience virtually all major changes in life as a loss. For 2 years, just as an example, my daughter has been talking about how much she wanted to get out of Dallas. Now she's been in St. Louis for 3 months and talking about how much she misses Texas. So for anyone to be able to say that they miss Texas is proof that the experience of change is always a loss, even when it is clearly and undeniably change for the better. What Warren is experiencing is familiar to most of us. Our childhood was filled with a fairly high degree of religious confidence. Our parents, our church, told us what was real. They told us that even though we appear to be mortal, just like the grass and trees and chickens and pigs all around us, but we humans, we have an eternal existence. We have a soul that will live on after our mortal bodies are no more. And we, that is our family, our particular church, had certainty that our souls would reside forever in a place of eternal reward, even though many other souls, probably including most of the people who went to other churches, were going to spend eternity in a place of eternal torment because they didn't have the right holy books or the right rituals or the right magical incantations to say. Because this vital information came to us from the authority figures in our lives, our parents, our Sunday school teachers, our ministers, our priests, our elders. They were our examples in life. They were the people we were supposed to trust and obey and believe in and imitate. So we only pretended when we were young to have the courage to question those things. And then when we got older, we only pretended to believe it all. Even then, virtually no one would say it out loud. Somewhere along the line, disillusionment sets in. You find yourself, as Warren did, having to choose between sticking with your religious convictions or loving your own son. And unfortunately, many people have made the wrong decision through the years. But your mind suddenly finds itself in that paradox of choice. Some realized that while both society and the legal system had given up on trying to make people stay in bad marriages, but the church still would condemn someone for trying to leave a toxic relationship. The church forced people to remain in misery lest they face alienation from their family, from their peer group. Sometimes people escape that by nothing more than reading, not a tragic realization of the hypocrisy of your local church or a revelation about a mega church pastor. Sometimes someone just took a college class in Bible and realized that the myth and superstition that they were so invested in started to unravel. I dare say that many people have just stumbled upon the work of Bishop Spong or Marcus Borg or Karen Armstrong, and some have even ended up on our YouTube channel. And you can see in the comment stream, if you ever go to our channel and look at what people say about sermons, there'll be lots of people with very positive plaudits about this is exactly what I've always believed. Thank you so much for saying that. And then someone will say, this is total hogwash. Roger Ray is the Antichrist. Now, you may not have seen those comments because they don't get to last very long. I can delete those. But I remember the first time I bought Bishop Spong's book, Why Christianity Must Change or Die, that it took me nearly 10 years to read it. I would read some of it and think, if this is true, my life is meaningless, and I'd stick it back on the shelf, and then someone would quote him and I'd have to give him another chance and take it back off the shelf. And most of us who were introduced to this aspect of faith through reading of Bishop Spong's books didn't love him the first time we read him. And we have the lectures he's delivered from our church are on our YouTube channel, still the most watched thing that we have on our channel, and lots of really, really derogatory comments from people all over the world. They're drawn to it like a moth to a candle. They have to watch it, they have to listen to it, but then they have to reject it in the end, because if you take it seriously, it changes everything. It does not feel good to have your comfortable myths taken away from you. Most of us grew up in false certainty about matters of eternal importance. And now we're being confronted by honesty that leaves us really insecure, almost dizzy with uncertainty. So Warren asked the question that I've heard here in classes and in discussion groups for years. Why does Jesus matter? Why identify ourselves as a Christian church? And I'm not sure if we had it all to do over again that we would. But why hold on to that name? Or any other for that matter. Why be Jewish? Why be Muslim? Why be Hindu or Buddhist? And in all honesty, I completely agree that most of what we were taught to believe in all of those traditional religions, most of it are just echoes, just reverberations of Iron Age myths and superstitions. What I believe happened to Jesus is what I believe happened to Buddha and Elijah and Moses and Elisha and Muhammad. Is that you have a person who has powerful insight, who is able to inspire people with their teachings, a reformer, probably a political radical, and people's minds are opened by the ideas that they present, the things that they say. They change the world. They change the way people feel about their lives. They change the way they see the world. But then when that person dies, the generation that follows them, the followers that want to keep their teachers' teachings alive, they begin to embellish the credentials of the teacher. And these people are not liars in the sense that they're not setting out to deceive. They're not malicious. They're trying to do a good thing. They're trying to say, you really ought to listen to Jesus because he walked on water, like Zoroaster walked on water, like Buddha walked on water, like Krishna walked on water. There are things that people say in the ancient world to make someone appear to be more important. Their father was a god. Their mother was a virgin. It's said about Roman emperors. It's said about great philosophers. It's a matter of building up your resume. They're not trying to trick you or deceive you. They're just trying to make you listen to the message, to understand that the message is that important. But once you keep pushing the messenger up on the pedestal, then the message becomes the messenger. By making the messenger seem more divine, more holy, more powerful, they believe that they're making the message louder, more believable, more persuasive. But what really happens is you lose the message. The message that Buddha and Jesus and Muhammad wanted to teach gets lost in adoration of the teacher. The messenger becomes the message itself. The Buddha even told his followers, they would ask him, "Are you a god? Are you a semigod?" And he would say, "No, I am not. I'm a finger pointing at the moon. I'm not the moon." I believe Jesus would have said the same thing. I'm not a god. I'm trying to change how you think about God. But the more that we push our prophets up into the clouds of irrational, idealized individuals, then they become more symbolic. They become less real. So the message itself is lost, and even the messenger then becomes trivialized when they become a symbol. They become like a good luck charm, a talisman that comes with all kinds of magical thinking and rituals and decorations with dubious side effects. Thank you. Evidently needed that. Aren't we glad spring is here, even with all of its pollen and whatever? We bring our teenagers for religious education because we don't want them to be promiscuous. We don't want them to engage in risky behaviors with sex and drugs or illegal behavior. But that same moral corral can also condemn a teenager for just being gay. The majority of teen suicides are when they come to the awareness that they're gay and they can't help it, and their church won't accept them. And you think, if you've got the slightest thought that your kid might be gay and you take them to a church that condemns people for being gay, you are literally pushing your own children towards suicide. Or even the more complicated issues of gender role identity, that we force people to behave in a way that's not natural for them. We restrict their ability simply to be alive, to simply be human, to lead fulfilled human lives. Generations of parents have taken their children to religious training in order to protect their children. And it works on some, and others are able to hear it and kind of ignore it. I had two brothers, and they both were able to go to the same Sunday school classes that I went to and completely ignore it. But I was terrified. I took it all in. I was the vulnerable one. I believed it. And so I should be a member of the Supreme Court right now. I'm the only person that was in college all of the 70s and all of the 80s and never smoked pot. So I could be a Supreme Court justice if I only had a law license. But, I guess there's that keeps you out of it. But parents take their kids to religious education in order to protect their kids, but the most vulnerable among them become crushed by those same myths and superstitions. The deification of Jesus and Buddha, the extremity of Islamic and Hindu devotion to their prophets and teachers, and certainly many of the strictures of Catholic, Mormon, Jewish, and Muslim practice are not just illogical, they are reality denying. They are unhealthy, and they are incompatible with science and the modern world. And there you have it, folks. I mean, that's the exit door from religion. Once you debunk the ridiculous claims with all of its time-consuming and expensive ritual and moral limitations, its hideous guilt, its sectarian violence, its wars, and its family divisions, then you walk away from all of that and join what Bishop Spong calls the Church Alumni Association. And even for many of us, the first time you hear yourself say it, the first time you hear it coming out of your mouth, it's a shock. Your own ears are burning with hearing yourself say, we don't go to church anymore. We used to be Mormon. We used to be Jewish. We used to be Muslim. we're not practicing Catholics. We're not practicing Muslims. We aren't really Christian. And hence you see the rapid decline of churches in Europe and America, and of course in China and much of Africa. And as the information superhighway finds its way into even the most isolated corners of the world, mythology and superstition are not likely to last much longer. So why do we bother? Why are we here? And more existentially, why do I bother? When your sense of loss, of your self-understanding as a Catholic or a Mormon or an evangelical, that when that loss is fresh, then it really is a wound. It is experienced as a terrible loss. And you can be grieving both for the loss, and you can grieve the loss of all those years of your life that you spent living in a particular way because you thought God demanded it of you. It's hard to hear that you may have wasted 10, 20, 30 years of your life trying to live up to principles that don't make any sense. I have found that the reason to go back into institutional religion, back to church, is because I think the message that Jesus actually died for is that important. I have tried to seek, not for Jesus or Buddha, but I want to seek what they sought. I want to try to look for what they looked for. I want for my people, for my world, my community, the city where I live, exactly what Muhammad wanted for his. I want peace and stability. I want enough prosperity for people to lead decent lives. I want justice, a fair justice. I want to see the kingdom of God here. I don't want to have to die and go to it or pray for it to show up out of the clouds. I want to partner with God and with you, with Jews and Muslims, Catholics and Mormons, to minimize human suffering, to elevate the value of human life, whether that human is elderly and confused or still sitting in diapers on the floor in the nursery. I want people to be safe in the workplace, and I want them to be paid for having gone there. I want them to have access to appropriate clothing and transportation and housing and health care, and hope for a reasonable retirement. I want a poor black man on trial in the justice system to have just as good a chance of getting a fair trial as a rich white man. And that has never existed in the United States. I want women to go into any profession that they want to and to be paid exactly the same as a man doing the same work. And if you're Mormon and you don't want to use caffeine or alcohol, don't. But don't try to tell anybody else what to do. If you're a Catholic and you don't believe in abortion or contraception, I've got good news for you. You don't have to have one. You don't have to use contraception. But you really have no business trying to manage anybody else's body. If you're an evangelical and you think that gay marriage is just wrong and you hate it, good news. You don't have to have a same-sex marriage, but you have no business telling anybody else how to live their life. I think that Jesus gave us a message of liberation and of justice, but the church has turned it into a prison. The church has become a defender of oppressors, a dispensary of guilt and irrational moralizing, and frankly, quite tedious rituals. I get that people who were promised that they had a friend in the clouds who granted wishes and that they could pray and their soul would end up in a place of eternal reward can feel very cheated when they realize that all of those promises were based on nothing but superstition. But I bother with church because even though there is death in traditional religion, there is also life and freedom and joy and justice in the message that was heralded by prophets and martyrs and saints of all of the world's religions. So I bother because I want that message. I want to be in the stream of that message of liberation and hope and the alleviation of suffering. I'm not inviting Jesus into my heart or memorizing the Quran. I'm not abstaining from alcohol or caffeine or meat, and don't even talk to me about bacon. You're free to choose for yourself. I don't blame anyone for feeling mad about having been lied to by their church and for having their life experiences and choices dramatically curtailed by fealty to an ancient cultic myth. That's a hard loss, and it's hard to hear. But I would remind you that it probably wasn't all bad, that there were parts of your faith tradition that did help you to control your appetites and to lead a decent life, though I recognize that is not a sufficient excuse. But when you are done being mad about the magic and superstition not being true, there is still a real world waiting for your attention, if you're grown up enough to find out what's really going on. When you are ready to get your head out of the clouds, there is a spiritual war going on between the political, economic, and social forces that cause suffering. 40% of the food produced in the United States is thrown away while we have people who are hungry. There is a real issue of great spiritual importance all around you that keeps people from leading decent lives. And if this life is all there is, then we really ought to make this life as free of suffering as possible. And you and your talent, your intelligence, your convictions, your principles, your energy are needed to kick at the darkness until it bleeds daylight. Though the real Jesus, as well as the real Moses, the real Muhammad, the real Buddha, are often hidden from our sight, but it seems like there have always been a few people around who got it. There's always been someone around that understood that all the religious mumbo-jumbo was just curtains and fog that hid the real message. One example that came to mind this week, this 20th century Irish songwriter, or British songwriter, James Miller, he recast Jesus in the story of an honestly human context. In this song, in part, the ballad of the carpenter says, Jesus was a working man and a hero you will hear. He became a wandering journeyman and he traveled far and wide. He noticed how wealth and poverty live always side by side. So he said, come, all you working men, farmers and weavers too, if you would stand as one, this world belongs to you. When the rich men heard what the carpenter had done, to the Roman troops they ran, saying, put this rebel Jesus down. He's a menace to God and man. Now Jesus walked among the poor, for the poor were his own kind, and they never let them get near enough to take him from behind. So they hired one of the trader's trade, an informer was he, and he sold his brother to the butchers for a fistful of silver money. And Jesus sat in the prison cell, and they beat him and offered him bribes to desert the cause of his fellow man and work for the rich man's tribe. And the sweat stood out on Jesus' brow, and the blood was in his eye when they nailed his body to the Roman cross, and they laughed as they watched him die. 2,000 years have passed and gone, many a hero too, but the dream of this poor carpenter remains. It remains in the hands of you. If we're ready to grow up and set aside childish myth and superstition, there's an awful lot of work to be done to reclaim the message. Amen.
You have been watching a progressive Christian video from the Community Christian Church of Springfield, Missouri. We encourage our viewers to donate to our efforts in feeding the homeless and hungry of our community. Write to us at Reverend Dr. Ray at AOL.com for more information.